The lightning split the sky like a jagged knife, and Isaac Emerson saw her stumbling figure through sheets of rain so thick he could barely make out his own horse's ears. He had been riding back to his ranch outside Cimarron, New Mexico territory, when the storm caught him halfway across the open range. It was late September of 1878, and the weather had turned vicious without warning, the way it often did in this unforgiving territory. Isaac had planned to push through to his homestead, but something made him look to the left at just the right moment. And there she was, a figure in a pale dress that clung to her body. Her dark hair plastered against her face as she half walked, half collapsed through the mud. He spurred his bay mare forward, rain hammering against his hat and shoulders. The woman didn't seem to hear him approaching over the roar of wind and thunder. She fell to her knees just as he reached her, and he swung down from his saddle in one fluid motion. "Madam." He shouted over the storm, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were unfocused, lips tinged blue. He grabbed her shoulders gently and her head lolled backward. She was barely conscious. Without thinking twice, Isaac scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, cold and trembling violently against his chest. He managed to get her draped across his saddle before pulling himself up behind her, holding her secure with one arm while guiding his horse with the other. "You're safe with me now, I promise you this," he said into her ear, though he doubted she could hear him. His ranch was still 3 miles off, but there was an old line shack about a mile east that he and his hands used during cattle drives. It would have to do. The woman's breathing was shallow, and he could feel her shaking even through his wet coat. Hypothermia was setting in, and if he didn't get her warm soon, she wouldn't make it through the night. The ride to the shack felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. The wind fought him every step, and his mare struggled through mud that sucked at her hooves. But Isaac had spent most of his 26 years in this territory, and he knew how to push through when pushing through was the only option. The line shack appeared out of the darkness like a blessing. It was small, just one room with a stone fireplace, but it was dry and it had wood. Isaac half fell off his horse, keeping the woman secure in his arms, and kicked the door open. He laid her on the single cot in the corner, then immediately set about building a fire. His hands shook from cold as he struck the match, but years of practice paid off, and soon flames were licking at the kindling. Only then did he turn his full attention to the woman. She was young, maybe 20 or 21, with delicate features and long dark hair that hung in wet ropes around her shoulders. Her dress was torn in places, and her feet were bare and bleeding. How long had she been out there? Where had she come from? Those questions would have to wait. Right now, he needed to get her warm. Isaac grabbed the wool blankets from the chest by the wall. They were musty but dry. He knew he needed to get her out of the wet dress, but propriety warred with necessity. In the end, necessity won. He turned his back while he helped her sit up enough to peel the sodden fabric away, trying to preserve her modesty as much as possible while wrapping her in the dry blankets. She murmured something incoherent, her eyes fluttering but not opening. "You're going to be all right," he told her, pulling off his own wet coat and boots. He needed to get warm too, but he was in better shape than she was. He fed more wood into the fire until it was roaring, then pulled the cot closer to the heat. For the next hour, Isaac did everything he could think of. He wrapped her feet in torn strips of his spare shirt after cleaning the cuts as best he could with water from his canteen. He piled every blanket in the shack over her. He kept the fire blazing. And slowly, painfully slowly, color began to return to her face. The storm raged outside, wind howling through gaps in the wood, but inside the small shack it was growing warm. Isaac sat on the floor beside the cot, his back against the wall, and watched the woman's breathing steady. His own exhaustion was catching up with him, but he was afraid to sleep in case she took a turn for the worse. Around midnight, by his guess, her eyes finally opened. They were brown, he noted, a deep, warm brown that reminded him of his mother's coffee. She blinked several times, confusion clouding her features, then tried to sit up. "Easy now," Isaac said gently, holding up his hands. "You're safe. You were caught in the storm. I found you out on the range." She stared at him for a long moment, then down at herself wrapped in blankets. Realization crossed her face, followed by a flush of color. "My dress," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. It was soaked through. You would have died from the cold." He gestured to where he had draped it over a chair near the fire. "It's drying. I tried to be respectful." She studied him, and he saw her taking in his face, his clothes, the gun at his hip. Then she looked around the shack. "Where am I?" "Old Line Shack on the eastern edge of my ranch, about 15 miles from Cimarron. I'm Isaac Emerson." He kept his voice calm and steady, the way he would with a spooked horse. "What's your name? Where did you come from?" The woman closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had passed out again. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. Clara Vance. I was on a stage. We were attacked." Isaac felt his gut tighten. "When? Where?" "I don't know. Yesterday maybe, or this morning. Everything is confused." Her eyes opened again, and he saw tears gathering. "There were gunshots. The driver tried to run, but they shot the horses. Everyone scattered. I just ran. I ran until I couldn't anymore." "Who else was on the stage?" "2 men. Merchants, I think, and an older woman. I don't know what happened to them." Her voice broke. "I just kept running through the night. Then the storm came." Isaac's mind raced. Stage robberies weren't uncommon, but usually the bandits took what they wanted and left. Sometimes they killed the driver and guards to avoid witnesses, but they rarely hunted down passengers, unless there was something specific they were after. Was there anything valuable on the stage? "Gold shipment. Bank money." Clara shook her head. "Not that I knew of. I was just traveling from Santa Fe to meet my uncle in Cimarron. He runs the general store there. My parents died last year and I have no other family. He sent me the ticket." "Your uncle is Samuel Vance." Isaac knew the storekeeper, a solid man in his 50s with a reputation for honesty. "Yes, you know him." "Everyone in Cimarron knows Sam. He's been worried sick, I'd wager. You were expected 2 days ago. The stage never arrived." Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I thought I was going to die out there. When the storm came, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't feel my feet anymore. I just kept walking because stopping meant dying." Isaac reached out hesitantly, then gently patted her hand where it clutched the blanket. "You're safe now. I promise you that. Soon as the storm breaks, I'll get you to town, to your uncle." She looked at him with such gratitude that something shifted in his chest. He had saved cattle from floods, horses from cougars, even pulled a fellow ranch hand from a cave-in once. But the way this woman looked at him, like he had given her the world itself, that was something different entirely. The rest of the night passed slowly. Clara drifted in and out of sleep while Isaac kept watch, feeding the fire and listening to the storm. He found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyelashes cast shadows in the firelight. He told himself it was just to make sure she was all right, but he knew that wasn't entirely true. By dawn, the storm had blown itself out, leaving the world washed clean and muddy. Clara was sleeping peacefully, her breathing deep and even. Isaac stepped outside to check on his horse and survey the damage. The sky was clearing, showing streaks of pink and gold. It would be a beautiful day. He was tending to his mare when he heard movement behind him. Clara stood in the doorway of the shack, wrapped in a blanket with her now dry dress clutched in her hands. In the morning light, even disheveled and bruised, she was beautiful. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Sore. Tired. Grateful to be alive." She managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Emerson, you saved my life." "Isaac," he corrected, "and I only did what anyone would do." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone would have stopped in a storm like that. Not anyone would have ridden out of their way. You did. That means something." He felt heat creep up his neck that had nothing to do with the sunrise. "Well, I'm just glad I was there. Let me step around the corner while you dress. Then we'll head to town." The ride to Cimarron took most of the morning. Isaac kept the pace easy since Clara was exhausted and hurting. She sat in front of him on the saddle, and he tried very hard not to notice how well she fit there, or how she had relaxed back against his chest after the first hour, trusting him completely. They talked as they rode. He told her about his ranch, how he had built it up over the last 5 years from nothing to a decent spread with 100 head of cattle and good grazing land. She told him about her life in Santa Fe, how she had taught music lessons to make ends meet after her parents died, how nervous she had been about starting over in a new town. "Cimarron is a good place," Isaac assured her. "Growing fast, but still small enough that people look out for each other. Your uncle has a lot of friends there. You'll be welcomed." "What about you?" she asked. "Do you have family in town?" "None living. My folks passed when I was 19. That's when I decided to strike out on my own, build something that was mine." He paused. "Gets lonely sometimes, but the work keeps me busy." He felt rather than saw her nod. "I understand lonely." Something in her voice made his arm tighten slightly around her waist where he held her steady. She didn't pull away. Cimarron appeared on the horizon just before noon. A collection of buildings sprawled along the Cimarron River, with the mountains rising behind. It was a town that had boomed with mining and ranching, and though it had rough edges like any frontier settlement, it had a sense of permanence that Isaac appreciated. Word of their arrival spread fast. By the time they reached Main Street, people were emerging from shops and houses. Samuel Vance came running from his store, his weathered face a mixture of joy and disbelief. "Clara, dear God, Clara." He pulled her down from the horse before Isaac could dismount, wrapping her in a fierce embrace. "We thought you were dead." The stage never came, and when the sheriff sent riders out, they found it abandoned. Blood on the ground. "We thought the worst." Clara was crying, her face pressed against her uncle's shoulder. Isaac dismounted quietly, giving them space, but Samuel looked up at him, his eyes shining with tears. "Isaac Emerson, what happened? Where did you find her?" Isaac explained quickly while a crowd gathered. The storm, finding Clara wandering half dead the line shack. He left out the parts about undressing her, about holding her through the night. Some things were private. The sheriff, a barrel-chested man named Tom Crawford, pushed through the crowd. "The stage driver was shot dead. We found him yesterday. 2 passengers are still missing, including an elderly woman named Margaret Hayes. The 3rd passenger, a merchant, made it to the Danvers ranch on foot. He's recovering there." "The bandits," Clara said, pulling away from her uncle. "Did you find them?" "Not yet, but we will." Sheriff Crawford's face was grim. "Can you tell me anything about them? Numbers? What they looked like?" Clara described what she remembered, which wasn't much. Everything had happened so fast. 6 or 7 men, all masked, on horseback. They had stopped the stage on a narrow pass about 20 miles east of town. When the driver tried to make a run for it, they opened fire. "Margaret Hayes," Clara added, her voice tight. "She was kind to me during the journey. We have to find her." "We're doing everything we can, miss," the sheriff assured her, but his expression suggested he didn't expect to find the woman alive. Samuel insisted on taking Clara immediately to his home behind the general store. Isaac started to take his leave, but Samuel grabbed his hand, pumping it vigorously. "You brought her back to me, Isaac. I can never repay that. Come to dinner tonight, please. It's the least I can do." Isaac wanted to refuse. He had work waiting, cattle to check on, fences to mend. But Clara was looking at him with those brown eyes, and he found himself nodding. "I'd be honored, Sam." He rode home in the afternoon sun, his mind churning. The stage attack bothered him. Bandits in the territory were usually after money or goods they could sell quickly. Hunting down passengers who fled made no sense unless there was something specific they wanted, or someone they wanted to keep quiet. His ranch came into view, the simple log house he had built himself, the barn and corrals, the windmill turning lazily in the breeze. His foreman, a weathered Mexican man named Rodrigo, came out to meet him. "Boss, we were worried. That storm was fierce." "Got caught in it," Isaac said, dismounting. "Ended up at the line shack." He gave Rodrigo a brief version of events as they walked the horse to the barn. Rodrigo whistled low. "Lucky you found her. Another few hours in that storm and that would have been the end." "I know." Isaac stripped the saddle off his mare and began rubbing her down. "Something doesn't sit right about that stage attack, though." "How so?" "Why chase the passengers? Stage robberies are about speed. Get in, get the goods, get out. These men took time to hunt people down. Maybe one of the passengers saw something they should not have." Isaac paused in his work. "Maybe, or maybe one of them had something the bandits wanted, something worth killing for." He thought about that all through the rest of the afternoon as he worked. He thought about it while he washed up and changed into clean clothes for dinner. And he was still thinking about it when he arrived at Samuel Vance's home that evening, carrying a jar of the peach preserves his cook had made last summer. Clara answered the door, and Isaac's breath caught. She was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders. The cuts on her face were already healing, and color had returned to her cheeks. She looked healthy and vibrant and so lovely that he forgot what he was going to say. "Isaac," she said, smiling, "come in. Uncle Sam is just finishing in the kitchen." The house was small but comfortable, filled with the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread. Samuel emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, his face creasing into a smile. "Isaac, right on time." Sit, sit. Dinner is almost ready." The meal was simple but delicious. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from the garden, and crusty bread. Isaac found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did, drawn into easy conversation with Clara and her uncle. They talked about the town, the ranch, Clara's journey west. Samuel told stories about her as a child, making her blush and protest. "Uncle Sam, please, you are embarrassing me." "Nonsense. Isaac should know what he is getting into, spending time with you." There was a twinkle in Samuel's eye that made Isaac shift in his seat. Was the old man matchmaking? He snuck a glance at Clara and found her looking down at her plate, a faint pink in her cheeks. After dinner, Samuel excused himself to smoke his pipe on the back porch, leaving Isaac and Clara alone to clear the dishes. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying. "Your uncle seems like a good man," Isaac said finally. "He is. He and my mother were very close. When she died, he wrote immediately, inviting me to come live with him. I was scared to leave Santa Fe, but I had nothing left there. No family, no real prospects." She handed him a clean plate. "And then the stage was attacked, and I thought my story was going to end before it really began." Isaac set the plate down and turned to face her. "I'm sorry you went through that. No one should have to face something like that alone. But I did not face it alone, not completely." She looked up at him, and the vulnerability in her expression made his heart ache. "You found me, Isaac. Out of that whole empty range in the middle of a storm, you found me. That feels like more than just luck." He wanted to agree to say that yes, maybe it was fate or providence or whatever name you wanted to give it. But the practical part of him, the part that had survived and thrived in this harsh land, hesitated. "I'm just glad I was there," he said instead. Something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment maybe, but she smiled and turned back to the dishes. "So am I." Samuel returned, and they moved to the small sitting room. Isaac found himself telling stories about the ranch, about the challenges of building something from nothing. Clara listened intently, asking questions that showed real interest, not just politeness. When it was finally time to leave, he did so reluctantly. "Thank you for dinner, Sam, Clara." He nodded to them both. "If you need anything, anything at all, my ranch is just an hour's ride from town." "Don't hesitate." "We won't," Samuel assured him. "And Isaac, come back soon. You are always welcome here." As Isaac rode home under a sky brilliant with stars, he replayed the evening in his mind. The way Clara's eyes lit up when she laughed, the grace of her hands as she worked, the sound of her voice. He had known her less than a day, but already she had worked her way under his skin in a way no woman ever had. It was dangerous, he told himself. She had just been through a trauma. She needed time to heal, to adjust to her new life. The last thing she needed was some lonely rancher complicating things. But even as he thought it, he knew he would find a reason to go back to town soon. Very soon. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern that Isaac told himself was perfectly reasonable. He needed supplies from the general store, so naturally he rode into Cimarron. While there, it would be rude not to check on Clara, see how she was settling in. And when Samuel invited him to stay for a meal, it would be ungracious to refuse. The truth was, he looked for excuses to see her. And based on the knowing looks Samuel gave him, and the way Clara's face brightened every time he arrived, he was not fooling anyone. Clara was resilient. The bruises faded, the cuts healed, and she threw herself into helping her uncle with the store. Isaac would come in ostensibly to buy nails or coffee and find her behind the counter, learning the inventory, chatting with customers. She had a natural warmth that people responded to, and within days, she knew half the town by name. They would talk while he pretended to consider his purchases. Small things at first, how she liked Cimarron compared to Santa Fe, his thoughts on the coming winter. But gradually the conversations deepened. She told him about her parents, her father's slow death from lung fever, her mother's grief that followed. He told her about losing his own parents to cholera, about the loneliness of those first years on his own. "You ever regret it?" she asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch of the general store watching the street. Samuel had shooed them outside, claiming he needed space to reorganize the stockroom. Starting the ranch, I mean, choosing such a solitary life. Isaac considered the question. "Sometimes, when winter comes and I am snowed in for days, or when I sit down to supper and it is just me and silence. But then, I remember what it feels like to build something with your own hands, to look out over land you carved from nothing and know it is yours. That makes the lonely times bearable." "What would make them more than bearable?" Her voice was soft, tentative. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The sun was setting, painting her in golden light. Her eyes were warm and open, and he saw the same longing there that he felt. "Having someone to share it with," he said honestly. "The right someone." A smile curved her lips. "And have you found the right someone, Isaac Emerson?" His heart was pounding. "I think maybe I have, but I do not know if she would want a life like that, out on a ranch, away from town. It is not an easy life. Some things are worth difficulty." She held his gaze. "Some things are worth taking a chance on." Before he could respond, the door burst open and Samuel emerged, looking flustered. Ah, there you are. Isaac, are you staying for supper? Clara has been teaching me how her mother made chicken with dumplings. The moment was broken, but something had shifted between them. As Isaac stayed for supper and then lingered after, talking by lamplight, he felt the certainty growing in his chest. This woman, this brave, warm, beautiful woman, was who he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. But he forced himself to go slow. She was still healing, still adjusting, and there was still the matter of the stage attack. The bandits had never been found, and Margaret Hayes remained missing. Sheriff Crawford and his deputies had searched for days, but found no trace. It was like the men had vanished into thin air. That question was answered 3 weeks after Isaac found Clara in the storm. He was in town again, this time with a legitimate need to pick up equipment he had ordered from back east. He was loading the plow blade onto his wagon when he heard shouting from the sheriff's office. A crowd was gathering, and Isaac joined them to find Sheriff Crawford standing on the steps, his face grim. "Folks, we found Margaret Hayes. She is alive, but barely. She was being held in a line shack up in the hills. We have 2 men in custody and we are hunting the rest." Relief and anger rippled through the crowd. Isaac found himself pushing forward. "Sheriff, what did they want? Why hold her?" Crawford's jaw tightened. "Her son is a judge in Santa Fe." They were trying to force him to dismiss charges against a gang member, used his mother as leverage, sent him a letter with a lock of her hair. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Kidnapping was bad enough, but threatening a judge's family crossed a line that even hardened frontier folk found unacceptable. "Did the judge give in?" Someone called out. "No. He sent word to us instead, and we have been hunting for her ever since. Found her this morning. She is with Doc Harrison now." Isaac felt sick. That poor woman held for weeks, terrified and alone, and Clara could have suffered the same fate if she had not escaped when she did. The thought made his blood run cold. He found Clara in the store, organizing tins of food on a shelf. When she turned and saw his face, her smile faded. "Isaac, what is wrong?" he told her quickly, watching as understanding dawned and then horror crossed her features. "She was being held all this time, but that means if I had not run. Do not think about that." He took her hands without thinking, holding them firmly. "You are safe. That is what matters." Samuel emerged from the back, having overheard. "Those men need to hang for this." "They will," Isaac assured him. "Judge or no judge, kidnapping will see them dancing at the end of a rope." That evening, Isaac found himself reluctant to leave town. He told himself it was because of the news, because he wanted to make sure Clara was truly all right. But as they sat in the gathering dusk on Samuel's porch, he admitted the truth, at least to himself. He did not want to be away from her. "Not now, not ever. Tell me about your ranch," Clara said suddenly. "Really tell me. What is it like?" So he did. He described the house, simple but solid, with a big stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the range. The barn where his horses nickered in greeting each morning. The creek that ran along the southern border, providing water year-round. The way the mountains looked at sunrise, purple and gold and magnificent. The silence that was not really silence, but filled with wind and birdsong and the lowing of cattle. "It sounds beautiful," she said wistfully. "Come see it." The words were out before he could stop them. "Come out to the ranch, let me show you." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure?" "More sure than I have been about anything in a long time." Samuel, sitting in his rocking chair nearby, cleared his throat. "That is a kind invitation, Isaac, but you know how people talk. A young woman, unmarried, visiting a bachelor's ranch alone, it could damage her reputation." Isaac felt his face heat. "Of course. I was not thinking. I apologize." "However," Samuel continued, a smile tugging at his mouth, If her uncle were to accompany her as a chaperone, that would be perfectly proper. Clara laughed, a sound like music. Uncle Sam, you are not subtle. I am too old to be subtle. Life is short. Isaac is a good man, and he clearly cares for you. And unless I am very much mistaken, you care for him too. So let us skip the months of dancing around it and move forward, shall we? Isaac looked at Clara and found her looking back at him, her cheeks pink but her eyes steady. Uncle Sam is right, she said softly. Life is too short. I almost died out there in that storm. And every day since I have been grateful not just to be alive, but that you were the one who found me. That feels like it means something. It does, Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. It means everything. They rode out to the ranch 2 days later, Isaac leading the way on his mare, Clara and Samuel following in the store's wagon. It was a perfect October day, crisp and clear, with the leaves turning gold in the cottonwoods along the river. As they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, Isaac watched Clara's face anxiously. He had never cared so much what someone thought of his home, but when her face lit up with genuine delight, the knot in his chest loosened. Isaac, it is lovely, she breathed. And seeing it through her eyes, he supposed it was. The house sat on a gentle rise, surrounded by tall grass that rippled in the breeze. The barn and corrals were well maintained, and his small herd was visible in the distance, grazing peacefully. Mountains rose behind it all, majestic and eternal. Rodrigo came out to greet them, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw the visitors. Isaac made introductions, and his foreman took charge of the horses with his usual efficiency. "Welcome to my home," Isaac said, suddenly nervous. What if she did not like it inside? What if it was too rough, too rustic? But Clara stepped through the door and immediately smiled. "It feels like you," she said simply, and somehow that was the highest compliment she could have paid. They spent the afternoon touring the ranch. Isaac showed them the barn, where Clara delighted in meeting his horses. He took them down to the creek, where they skipped stones and talked. Samuel, bless him, somehow always managed to fall a few steps behind, giving them moments of relative privacy. "I can see why you love it here," Clara said as they stood looking out over the range. "It is peaceful, honest. You can see the work of your hands everywhere you look." "It gets lonely," Isaac admitted. "I told you that, winters especially. Just me and Rodrigo and the occasional drifter we hire on. I always told myself that was enough, but since meeting you, I realize how much I was missing." She turned to him, the wind catching her hair. "What were you missing?" "Someone to share it with, someone to come home to talk with at the end of a long day. Someone to make plans with, to dream with." He took a breath. "Someone like you, Clara," her eyes shimmered with tears. "I have been alone since my parents died, going through the motions, surviving but not really living. And then that stage was attacked and I thought my story was over. But you found me, you saved me, and now I feel like maybe my story is just beginning." "I hope so," Isaac said fervently. "I want to be part of that story, Clara, if you will have me." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too." He took her hand, so small in his calloused one, and lifted it to his lips. "Then let us take this slow, do it right. Let me court you properly. And if you still feel the same way a few months from now, I will ask your uncle for permission to marry you." "A few months." She laughed through her tears. "Isaac Emerson, I may not want to wait that long." "Then we will see," he said, grinning. "But I want to do right by you. You deserve that." They walked back to the house hand in hand to find Samuel sitting on the porch with coffee, looking extremely pleased with himself. "So," he said, "did you two have a nice walk?" "Uncle Sam, you are impossible," Clara said, but she was laughing. "Perhaps, but I am also right." "Isaac, we should be heading back before dark, but thank you for showing us your home." "Come back anytime," Isaac said. "Both of you. You are always welcome." As he watched them drive away, Clara turning to wave until they disappeared over the rise, Isaac felt his heart swell with hope and joy. He had not been looking for love, but it had found him anyway, in the form of a lost woman in a storm. And now he could not imagine his life without her. The courtship that followed was the sweetest time of Isaac's life. He rode into town 2 or 3 times a week, always finding excuses that Samuel saw right through but never questioned. He would take Clara for walks along the river, always properly chaperoned, and they would talk for hours, about everything and nothing. Their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. He learned that she loved music and missed her piano from Santa Fe. So he rode all the way to Santa Fe himself and arranged to have it shipped to Cimarron, watching her face light up like Christmas morning when it arrived. She learned that he had a weakness for fresh baked bread, so she made sure there was always a loaf waiting when he visited. Small kindnesses that spoke of growing love. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting with Samuel while the whole town watched and whispered. Isaac did not care. Let them talk. He was proud to be seen with Clara, proud of the way she had charmed everyone in town, proud of her kindness and her courage. At night, lying in his empty bed at the ranch, he would think about the future. About Clara living here, her laughter filling the silent rooms. Children maybe someday, running through the tall grass. Growing old together, building a life that was more than just survival, but true happiness. The trial of the men who attacked the stage and kidnapped Margaret Hayes came in November. Isaac accompanied Clara and Samuel to the courthouse, sitting protectively beside her as the proceedings unfolded. It was hard to hear the details of that day, to know how close he had come to losing her before he ever found her. But Clara sat straight and brave, even when she was called to testify about what she had seen. All 4 men who were caught were found guilty. 2 were sentenced to hang for murder and kidnapping. The others got long prison terms. The remaining gang members had fled the territory and were still at large, but warrants were issued for their arrest. When it was over, Clara let out a shaking breath. "It is finished," she said quietly. "Yes," Isaac agreed, taking her hand. "Now you can truly start over." That evening they had dinner at the town's small restaurant. Samuel had begged off, claiming he was tired from the long day in court, but Isaac suspected the old man was giving them space. They sat across from each other at a corner table, the oil lamps casting soft light. "Clara," Isaac said, setting down his fork. "I know I said I would wait a few months, but I find I do not want to wait any more." She looked up, her eyes wide. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since that moment in the storm when you opened your eyes and looked at me. I want to spend my life with you if you will have me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life together, a real life, full of love and joy and all the things that make life worth living." "Yes," she said immediately, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Isaac, I love you too, so much." He reached across the table and took her hands. "Then I will speak to your uncle tonight, and if he gives his blessing, we can set a date, soon if you are willing. I do not want to wait any longer than we must." "Neither do I," she said, laughing through her tears. Samuel gave his blessing without hesitation, crushing Isaac in a bear hug and declaring that he had known from the first moment that they were meant for each other. They set the date for early December, just after the first snow. It was fast, but neither of them saw the point in waiting. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Clara sewed her wedding dress with help from the women in town, who had adopted her as one of their own. Isaac threw himself into preparing the ranch, adding rooms to the house and making everything as perfect as he could for his bride. He built furniture, laid in supplies for winter, and generally drove Rodrigo mad with his nervous energy. "Boss, the house is perfect. She will love it." "Relax," his foreman said with exasperation. But Isaac could not relax. This was the most important thing he had ever done, and he wanted everything to be right. The wedding day dawned cold and clear, with snow sparkling on the mountains. The church was packed with what seemed like the entire town of Cimarron. Isaac stood at the front in his best suit, palms sweating, heart pounding, waiting. And then the doors opened and Clara walked in on Samuel's arm, and Isaac forgot how to breathe. She was radiant in a simple white dress she had made herself, her dark hair loose under a veil, carrying wildflowers that the women had dried and saved from summer. But it was her smile that undid him, bright and joyous and full of love. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Isaac spoke his vows with a steady voice, promising to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Clara's voice shook with emotion, but her words were clear. They exchanged simple gold bands, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the audience were heard to sigh. The reception was held at the general store, which Samuel had decorated with ribbons and pine boughs. There was music and dancing and food enough for an army. Isaac danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling that she was his, truly his, for the rest of their lives. As the sun began to set, they made their goodbyes and headed out to the ranch. Isaac had borrowed a closed carriage for the occasion, and they rode together under a sky turning pink and gold, wrapped in warm blankets. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "More than I ever thought possible," she said, snuggling against him. "I keep thinking about that night in the storm. How scared I was, how certain I was that I was going to die. And now here I am, married to the man who saved me, starting a new life. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I do not ever want to wake up," Isaac said, kissing the top of her head. The ranch house was warm when they arrived, fires burning in the hearths. Rodrigo had made himself scarce, staying in the bunkhouse to give them privacy. Isaac carried Clara over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her gently down in the front room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Emerson," he said. She looked around at the home they would share, then back at him, her eyes shining. "I am home," she said simply. "Wherever you are, that is home." That first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other that went beyond the physical into something deeper. They talked long into the night, making plans and sharing dreams, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Isaac felt a peace he had never known before. The winter that followed was the best of Isaac's life. He had been right about what it would be like to share the ranch with someone. Clara brought light and warmth to the house, her presence transforming it from a simple dwelling into a real home. She learned the rhythms of ranch life quickly, rising early to make breakfast, helping tend the animals, keeping the house warm and welcoming. They developed routines and traditions. Morning coffee on the porch when the weather allowed, watching the sunrise together. Evening meals by the fire, talking about their days. Saturday visits to town to see Samuel and pick up supplies, returning with news and gossip to share. Sunday church services, sitting together in their regular pew. Clara set up her piano in the front room, and the sound of music filled the house. She would play in the evenings, sometimes singing, sometimes just letting her fingers wander over the keys. Isaac would sit and listen, watching her face in the firelight, marveling at his good fortune. They celebrated their first Christmas together, just the two of them since the weather was too harsh to travel to town. Isaac had carved her a beautiful jewelry box from walnut wood, lined with velvet he had bought on a secret trip to Santa Fe. She gave him a warm coat she had sewn herself, every stitch done with love. They exchanged gifts by firelight, then made love slowly and tenderly, whispering promises of forever. Spring came, bringing new life to the ranch. The calves were born, and Clara delighted in their wobbly-legged attempts at walking. She named several of them, despite Isaac's protests that they were cattle, not pets. But he let her do it anyway because her joy was worth more to him than any amount of logic. In April, Clara missed her monthly courses. She did not say anything at first, afraid to hope. But when she missed a second month and began feeling ill in the mornings, she finally told Isaac over breakfast one morning. "I think I might be with child," she said nervously. Isaac dropped his fork, his eyes going wide. "Truly, I think so. I should go to town, see the doctor to be sure." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into his arms and spinning her around, both of them laughing. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." The doctor confirmed it the next week. Clara was indeed expecting, probably due in late October or early November. Isaac walked on air for days, already making plans for a nursery, for a cradle he would build with his own hands. Clara glowed with happiness, one hand often resting on her still, flat belly. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara was sick often in the early months, and Isaac fretted over her constantly, earning him affectionate scolding from his wife. But as summer came and her belly began to swell with new life, she bloomed. She had never been more beautiful to him than she was pregnant with their child, moving through the house with gentle grace. They talked endlessly about the baby. Names, hopes, dreams, whether it would be a boy or a girl. What kind of parent they each wanted to be. Isaac found himself thinking about his own father, trying to remember the lessons he had been taught, determined to be the kind of father that his child could look up to. In August, Clara's uncle visited for a week, bringing gifts for the baby. A rocking chair he had commissioned from the town carpenter, blankets and tiny clothes. Books on childrearing that made both Isaac and Clara laugh at the absurd advice contained within. "You are going to be wonderful parents," Samuel declared over dinner one night. "This child is blessed to have you both." "I hope we do not disappoint," Clara said, her hand on her rounded belly. "Impossible," Samuel said firmly. "Look at what you have already built together. A home, a life, a love that anyone can see is real and deep. That child will grow up surrounded by love. What more could any child need?" On a crisp October morning, just as the leaves were turning their most brilliant colors, Clara's labor began. Isaac had been prepared for this, or thought he had been. He had delivered calves and foals, had helped Rodrigo's wife with her youngest years ago. But this was different. This was his wife, his Clara, and every pain that crossed her face felt like a knife to his heart. The midwife they had hired, a capable woman named Mrs. Anderson, took charge immediately. She sent Isaac to boil water and gather clean linens, giving him tasks to keep him busy. The labor lasted all day and into the night, and Isaac paced and prayed and wished desperately that he could take the pain for her. Finally, just as midnight approached, he heard it, a thin, wavering cry that strengthened into a full-throated wail. Mrs. Anderson appeared in the doorway, beaming. "You have a son, Mr. Emerson, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife did beautifully." Isaac pushed past her, barely remembering to be polite. Clara lay in their bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Isaac, look at our son." He approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, his little mouth working. He had dark hair like his mother and what Isaac suspected would be his own gray eyes. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, and Isaac felt his heart crack open with love so fierce it almost hurt. "He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Clara asked softly. They had discussed names, of course, but had never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Isaac knew. "Daniel, after my father. Daniel Samuel Emerson, after both our fathers." Clara smiled through her tears. "Perfect. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world, little one. Mrs. Anderson bustled back in, shooing Isaac away so Clara could rest and feed the baby. Isaac went out to the kitchen in a daze and found Rodrigo waiting, looking anxious. "Well, is everyone all right, a boy?" Isaac said, his voice breaking. "We have a son, Rodrigo, a healthy son." His foreman grinned and pulled out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for this occasion. They toasted to the new baby, to Clara's health, to the future, and Isaac felt a completeness he had never imagined possible. The weeks after Daniel's birth were both the most exhausting and most joyful of Isaac's life. The baby needed constant attention, waking every few hours to feed, demanding to be held and changed and soothed. Clara recovered slowly from the birth, and Isaac found himself helping in ways he had never expected, walking the floor at midnight with a crying infant, learning to change nappies, singing rough lullabies in his off-key voice. But watching Clara with their son, seeing the fierce love in her eyes as she nursed him or the gentle way she touched his tiny face, Isaac fell in love with her all over again. She was no longer just his wife but the mother of his child, and the sight of her holding their baby filled him with awe. Samuel visited frequently, utterly besotted with his great-nephew. He would hold Daniel for hours, talking to him about everything and nothing, telling stories about Clara as a child. The baby seemed to know him, settling into his arms with content little sounds. Winter came again, and they settled into new rhythms. The ranch work continued, though Isaac delegated more to Rodrigo so he could help Clara with the baby. Daniel grew and thrived, becoming more alert and interactive. His first smile, given to Clara when he was 6 weeks old, made her cry with joy. His first laugh, coaxed out by Isaac making silly faces, became his father's proudest moment. By spring, Daniel was a plump, happy baby who adored his parents and the world in general. He would lie on a blanket on the porch, watching the world with wide, curious eyes. Clara would sit beside him, playing with him, singing to him while Isaac went about his work, always keeping them in sight. "I never knew I could be this happy," Clara said one afternoon. They were sitting together on the porch, watching Daniel attempt to roll over. "Some days I think about that night in the storm, how close I came to never having this, and I am so grateful." "I am grateful too," Isaac said, pulling her close. "Every single day. For you, for Daniel, for this life we have built. Do you ever think about having more children?" She asked a little shyly. "I think about it," he admitted. "I would love to give Daniel brothers and sisters, but only when you are ready. I know bearing a child is hard work," she smiled. "It is, but it is also the most worthwhile thing I have ever done. Let us see how we manage with Daniel for a while, but yes, I would like more children. I want a house full of love and laughter." "Then that is what we will have," Isaac promised. The months passed in a blur of joy and work and love. Daniel grew, learning to sit up, then crawl, then pull himself up on furniture. His first steps, taken when he was just over a year old, were toward Isaac coming in from the range, and his father caught him up with a whoop of joy. They celebrated his first birthday with a small party. Samuel came, of course, along with Rodrigo and his family, and a few other ranch families from the area. There was cake, though Daniel was more interested in smashing it than eating it, and laughter and love in abundance. When it was just the three of them again that evening, Clara putting a thoroughly exhausted Daniel to bed while Isaac cleaned up, he found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed in just over 2 years. Before that storm, he had been alone, content but not truly happy, not even realizing what he was missing. Now he had everything. A wife he loved beyond measure, a son who amazed him daily, a home that was full of life and love. That night as they lay in bed, Clara curled against his side, she spoke quietly into the darkness. "Isaac, I am pregnant again." He went very still, then turned to look at her. "Truly," she nodded, her hand on her belly. "Just a few months along, I think. But yes. Daniel is going to be a big brother." Isaac pulled her close, overwhelmed with emotion. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much, Clara. Thank you. Thank you for this life, for our children, for everything." "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for finding me in that storm. For saving my life. For being the man you are." This pregnancy was easier than the first. Clara was sick less, and she knew what to expect. Her belly grew through the winter and into the spring, while Daniel toddled around, too young to really understand, but somehow sensing that something was changing. On a warm May morning, their second child was born. Another boy, with his mother's dark hair and a lusty cry that announced his arrival. They named him Thomas, after Clara's father, and he fit into their family as if he had always been there. Watching Clara nurse their newborn while Daniel played at her feet, Isaac felt his heart swell almost painfully. This was his family, his boys, his wife, his life. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was for them. The years that followed were full and rich. The boys grew, Thomas following his older brother everywhere, getting into mischief that made Clara scold and Isaac hide his smiles. The ranch prospered, growing until Isaac had to hire on more hands. Clara's piano playing filled the house with music, and she began teaching both boys, though Daniel was more interested in horses and Thomas in anything he could take apart. When Daniel was 5 and Thomas 3, Clara gave birth to their daughter. She came into the world on a snowy December night, small and perfect, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's delicate features. They named her Rose, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the first moment he held her. "We should probably stop at 3, Clara said with a laugh a few weeks after Rose's birth, watching Isaac rock his daughter with such tender devotion that it brought tears to her eyes. "Whatever you want," Isaac said, not looking up from his daughter's face. "Though if you wanted 10, I would not complain." 3 is plenty," Clara assured him. "Our family is complete." And it was. The Emerson family became a fixture in Cimarron. Isaac and Clara were respected members of the community, known for their kindness and their solid partnership. Their children grew up healthy and loved, attending school in town and learning ranch work from their father. Daniel showed an early aptitude for ranching, following his father everywhere from the time he could walk. By the time he was 10, he could rope and ride better than some grown men. Thomas was the studious one, always reading, always curious about how things worked. Rose was the joy of the family, musical like her mother, kind-hearted, and adored by her protective older brothers. Samuel remained a constant presence in their lives until his passing when Daniel was 12. He died peacefully in his sleep, and the whole town mourned him. At his funeral, Clara spoke about the uncle who had given her a home when she had nowhere else to go, who had welcomed Isaac into their family, who had loved his great nieces and nephews with his whole heart. Isaac took over the general store, hiring a manager to run it while continuing to work the ranch. The extra income allowed them to expand further, to build the ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. Years passed. New Mexico became a state in 1912, a moment of celebration. The boys grew into men, Daniel taking over more of the ranch operations while Thomas went east to college, much to everyone's surprise, but returned after 4 years to help manage the business side of the ranch. Rose grew into a lovely young woman, teaching music to the children in town while she waited for the right man. Isaac and Clara watched their children's lives unfold with pride and joy. When Daniel married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and brought his bride to live in the house he had built on the eastern edge of the property, Clara cried happy tears. When Thomas announced his engagement to a young teacher from Santa Fe, they threw a celebration that the whole town attended. And when Rose finally fell in love with the new doctor in town and married him in the same church where her parents had wed, Isaac walked her down the aisle with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with new energy. Daniel and his wife had 4 children in quick succession, keeping everyone busy. Thomas and his wife had twins, to everyone's delight and exhaustion. Rose and her husband had a son and a daughter, both showing early signs of their mother's musical talent. As Isaac moved into his 60s, he gradually turned more of the ranch operations over to his sons, though he still rode out most days, unable to fully give up the work that had defined so much of his life. He and Clara would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had built a life on, surrounded by the sounds of grandchildren playing. "Did you ever imagine this?" Clara asked him one evening. They were both gray-haired now, their faces lined with the years, but still holding hands the way they had from the beginning. "That night in the storm, did you imagine that saving one lost woman would lead to all of this?" Isaac looked out at the ranch, at the house Daniel had built, the barn Thomas had expanded, the garden where Rose's children were currently hunting for bugs. He looked at his wife, still beautiful to him, perhaps more so now for all the years and love between them. "No," he admitted. "I just knew I could not leave you there. Everything else has been a gift, the greatest gift of my life." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "You told me that night that I was safe with you, that you promised me that. You have kept that promise every single day since." "And I will keep it until my last breath," he said, kissing the top of her head. They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. From inside the house came the sound of laughter, grandchildren being corralled for supper. The ranch stretched out before them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their years of work and love. Isaac thought back to that young man who had ridden through a storm and found a lost woman. He had been alone then, building a ranch but not really building a life. He had not known what he was missing until he looked down at Clara's face in the firelight of that old line shack and felt something shift in his heart. Now, surrounded by the evidence of their loved children, grandchildren, a thriving ranch, a community they had helped build, he understood that he had not just saved her life that night. She had saved his too in all the ways that mattered. "I love you, Clara Emerson," he said, the words as true now as the first time he spoke them. "And I love you, Isaac Emerson, today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together in the gathering dusk, 2 people who had found each other in a storm and built a lifetime of love from that moment of grace. Around them, their family moved through the house, their voices a song of love and continuity. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Isaac felt the deep peace of a life well lived, a promise kept, and a love that would endure beyond even death. In the years that followed, as Isaac and Clara moved into their 70s, they settled into the gentle rhythm of age. They were no longer the young couple building a life, but the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, respected and loved by children, grandchildren, and the entire community. Isaac finally stopped riding out daily when he was 74, his knees protesting too much to continue. But he still oversaw the ranch from the porch, Daniel and Thomas bringing him reports and asking his advice, even though they both knew the business as well as he did. It was respect, acknowledging that he had built all of this from nothing. Clara's hands grew too stiff for piano playing, arthritis stealing the music from her fingers. But she taught her grandchildren when they would sit still long enough, and the house still rang with music, even if she was no longer the one making it. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by more than 60 people, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. The party was held at the ranch, tables set up under the trees, food and laughter in abundance. When Isaac stood to make a toast, his voice shook with age and emotion. 50 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams. I found her lost in a storm, and she has been my guiding light ever since. Everything good in my life stems from that night, from the choice to stop, to help, to open my heart. Clara, you have given me more than any man deserves. Thank you for 50 years of love. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Clara stood and kissed him, and someone started playing a fiddle, and they danced slowly under the stars, the same stars that had shone on them that wedding night so long ago. Isaac passed away peacefully 3 years later, at 77, on a sunny afternoon in May. He had been sitting on the porch with Clara, holding her hand and watching the grandchildren play when he squeezed her fingers gently, said, "I love you," and simply slipped away. Clara held him as he went, tears streaming down her face, but also grateful. He had not suffered. He had gone surrounded by the evidence of their love, at peace with the world. The funeral was one of the largest Cimarron had ever seen, testament to the man he had been and the lives he had touched. Clara lived 3 more years after Isaac's passing, surrounded by family who made sure she was never alone. She spent her days in the rocking chair Isaac had made her decades ago, watching the ranch continue, knowing that what they had built would last long beyond them. On a cold December morning, just after her 80th birthday, Clara did not wake up. She had gone in her sleep, peacefully as Isaac had. Her family mourned but also celebrated, knowing she had lived a full and loving life, and that she was now reunited with the man who had saved her in a storm all those years ago. They buried her beside Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the big cottonwood tree where they had carved their initials on their first anniversary. Daniel and Thomas and Rose stood together at the graveside, their own children and grandchildren around them, and told stories about their remarkable parents. They built something lasting, Daniel said, looking out over the ranch that spread as far as the eye could see. Not just this place, but a legacy of love, of family, of keeping promises. That is what they leave us. And indeed, the Emerson Ranch thrived for generations. Daniel's children took it over when he was ready to retire, and their children after them. Thomas's descendants managed the business side, ensuring prosperity. Rose's children, scattered though they were, always came home for holidays, keeping the family connected. In Cimarron, the story of Isaac and Clara became legend. The rancher who found a lost woman in a storm and built a love story that lasted 53 years. Parents told their children, who told their children, keeping the memory alive. The house Isaac built still stood a century later, restored and cherished by his descendants. The cottonwood tree with their carved initials grew tall and strong. And every December, on the anniversary of that wedding so long ago, the family gathered at the ranch to remember and honor the couple who had started it all. Because Isaac had been right, that night in the line shack when he made his promise. Clara had been safe with him, Safe to love and be loved, safe to build a life, safe to grow old surrounded by the fruits of their partnership. And in return, she had given him the same safety, the same love, the same unwavering partnership. Their story was one of grace and love, of a chance meeting in a storm that became a lifetime of devotion. It was proof that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we least expect them, and that true love, once found, can create ripples that extend far beyond our own lives, touching generations we will never meet. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Isaac and Clara were together still, holding hands and watching over the family they created, the legacy they left, satisfied that they had lived well and loved fully, keeping every promise they had ever made to each other. The end.